and welcome back to In Suspense. This is the first episode of Series 10, and it's really great to be back after our summer break. I'm Nikki Smith, and I'm here today with one of my co hosts, the lovely Lauren North. Lauren, how are you? How was your summer?
Hello, Nikki. I'm very well. I'm very happy to be back with In Suspense. It's felt like a really long time. Hello, everybody. Hello, listeners. The summer was very long. Somehow, I think I managed to strike the balance between work and hanging out with the kids, but that's pretty much because I had quite a nice deadline and because my children quite like to sit in front of a screen now, so it wasn't so bad. In fact, I've had that much time that I have signed up for a marathon, which is going on in October, which just suddenly feels quite insane. But yeah, the same old stuff, really. How about you, Nikki?
Yes, I'm good, thank you. I can't believe you signed up for a marathon, Lauren.
I haven't run it yet, so
I am
no
in awe.
congratulations.
Well, I've seen some of your training runs, and I'm incredibly impressed. There is absolutely no way I could run 1 kilometre, let alone, goodness knows, a marathon length. Is just incredible.
Oh, that's
But yes, I've had a lovely summer. Thank you. Again, it's always juggling, isn't it? It's juggling work and family time and things. I mean, I wish the weather could have been better as well. Not that we're complaining today; it's absolutely fantastic. But I didn't actually go abroad anywhere. But it was lovely to see the beach party making it out to a variety
yes.
of sunny destinations. And it's obviously been a real thrill to see it in the Heat Seekers chart all summer.
Of
So
course.
look,
Congratulations.
yes, thank you very much. We've had A levels, GCSE results, a 16th birthday, and an 18th birthday in our house. So it has felt very full on. And I'm really looking forward to things being a little bit calmer now over the next few months so I can get stuck into my book, which will hopefully be out in the 2025 book, this is, which I'm just in the planning stages of at the moment.
Exciting. Oh, that's exciting. I always feel like I'm slightly ahead with books, but I've just realized that I haven't even started writing my 2025 book yet. And I'm not starting for a couple of months. So you're ahead of me. I don't like it. I like to be the winner always. But
So,
it's,
right, Lauren, I know that you'll catch up and you'll be
oh, I don't
drinks
know.
ahead
I
of
don't
me.
know.
So I'm much slower. So, yes.
Well, congratulations. You've had a fantastic summer, and congratulations on the A level GCSEs and birthdays as well. So, today's episode, we are
Yeah.
asking the question thrillers. How dark is too dark? And our guest today is BP Water, whose latest novel, Notes on a Murder, is a very dark thriller. So, he's the perfect guest for us. But before we dive in, Nikki, which has been your darkest book to write, do you think?
Well, that's a really interesting question, actually, Lauren. I think, I mean, All in Our Head dealt with a particularly dark theme, which was kind of postpartum psychosis. So that was pretty dark. But I've had a kind of quite a brutal murder in Look What You Made Me Do, and then of course there's the scene with the arm in the beach party, which I won't go into too much detail about if people haven't read it. So, I mean, I think thrillers by their nature always deal with kind of dark themes, and it really just depends how they're actually portrayed in the book that determines whether the reader finds them kind of dark or not. I mean, you get murders in cozy crime, don't you, but they're not
Mm.
particularly gruesome, or they don't feel particularly dark. And then you can have another perhaps less kind of perilous incident which actually seems a lot darker to the reader when they're reading it, if it's a kind of dark thriller. So yeah, I think there's a variety of things there. But what do you think? What do you think makes a dark thriller?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think having read all of your books, even though The Beach Party does have a few shocking scenes, I think your darkest book is Look What You Made Me Do. I think there's just a real undercurrent of darkness to that one, if I had to say. My darkest one is 100% All the Wicked Games. And
Yeah,
I
I'd
think
agree with that.
I'd got so sick of writing The Anxious Mothers that I didn't have any children in all the Wicked Games. And so I went to town because with children you have to be a little bit careful how dark you go. So I went to town on The Dark, and it's
Yeah.
possibly been my least successful book. Very sad. It has made me consider what my readers specifically are looking for from me, and it perhaps isn't dark, dark, dark. dark.
Yeah.
But I do agree. I think it's definitely how it's handled. And you make such a good point that cozy crime has a murder. Because I've just started reading a cozy crime. It's one of the first ones I've ever read. And there's suddenly a dead body. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I was expecting a dead body in a cozy crime in that way. But yeah, so I agree completely. It is about how it's handled.
Well, I think that we should probably ask BP Walter, who is also known as Barnaby. I know he's BP Walter on his books, but let's see what he thinks, shall we? Should we get him on? Welcome, Barnaby, to In Suspense.
Welcome. Welcome, BP Water, to In Suspense. First of all, is it okay if we call you Barnaby?
That is very much okay.
But there was a bit of a pause there, and I thought you might say no.
No. No, I definitely wouldn't be BP throughout the. It would sound like a petrol station.
What does the P stand for?
Philip.
I would have gone Peter. That's interesting. Hello. Right, Barnaby. So before we dive in without questions, would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners, please?
Yes, hello. I am Barnaby. I write under BP Walter, as we've heard, and I write psychological suspense fiction. And my new book coming out this autumn is called Notes on a Murder. And my previous books, there are 6 books in total, but my most recent 3 were The Locked Attic, The Woman on the Pier, and The Dinner Guest.
Amazing. And you did just slightly forget to mention something, which is that you are a Sunday Times bestseller with The Dinner Guest. I've sold over 100,000 copies. You're also Waterstones Thriller of the Month in April 2021 and have TV and film rights sold. So don't do yourself too short there.
That's lovely of you to say.
So can we start by asking you to talk about your latest thriller, Notes on a Murder? Nikki and I've read it, and it's such a gripping and twisty thriller. So can you tell us what it's about, please?
Sure. Notes on a Murder is about a family holiday, or it is to start with. It's about a young man called Oliver, and he's in his 20s. He's just finished his undergraduate degree. He's in that sort of vague time between sort of not really being a child in the family group, but not really quite being adult enough not to be part of the family unit. So he is a little bit frustrated with this family holiday they do every year. They go to the same villa in Greece every year, and he's kind of just a bit bored and stifled by both he and his brother are. And Oliver goes off and meets another young man in Greece, and they end up having a fling. And for Oliver, he feels like he's fallen in love with this young man called Alistair. And it's much more than a fling to him. He thinks it's true love. And during their time together over this holiday, they meet a very charismatic and very mysterious guy called Argento, who lives on an island just off the coast. And he invites them to this island for dinner one evening. And they both go. And when they're there, Argento takes Oliver off for a little bit to show him something down a winding path into the underground basement of the island. And what he encounters there changes Oliver's holiday completely. In fact, it changes his life completely. He's never the same again. And I won't reveal what happens down there, but he decides to keep on going back. And this decision to keep going back to this island with this reoccurring invitation impacts him in considerable ways. And the novel is told between this holiday, which is in the 1990s, and the impact this has had on him in the present day, and which is set in the UK. So we kind of get to see it happening, and then the after effects of what happened in Greece. So yeah, that's the general spoiler-free kind of pitch for the book.
Amazing.
It's brilliant. And as you know, I loved it, Barnaby.
Thank you.
And really did. I thought it was brilliant. And as someone who writes destination thrillers as well, I particularly loved your setting of Greece and the private island. And I just wondered what made you decide to set it kind of on Santorini and around Santorini.
I think there are a couple of reasons, really. Firstly, I think when a book arrives with me, this almost links back to the whole kind of question we often get asked, doesn't it, of where do we get our ideas? And for me, it isn't always the way, but in this instance, the setting was part of the idea. And I think the best way to describe when a book kind of arrives to me is almost like I see it as a whole thing all at once, like a painting in some ways. And this was an immediate sun-drenched kind of like very hot thriller in my head. And I also liked the idea of it being set in Greece because I'm a big fan of John Fowles's novel, The Magus. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with The Magus. It's a very, very long, sprawling kind of epic. And it's very different in many respects to Notes on a Murder. But it does have this kind of key Greece setting and this young man who kind of like finds a part of himself on a mysterious island there. So there are many nods to the Magus within the novel, and not least the setting. So it was kind of the combined sense of I'd never really done a book set somewhere exotic and hot before. They've all been in places sort of like Chelsea and
quite exotic for some.
yeah. And I did like the idea of just kind of playing with a different palette, so to speak, when writing it. I would have loved to have gone. I've never actually been to Greece. I would have loved to go there, and I was planning to, but as with publishing, we can't predict these things. And this book was originally slated to be published in 2024, and then got moved to 2023, and I didn't have time basically to go to Greece.
It's always the way, isn't it? Well, you wouldn't know that you've not been.
Well, you wouldn't know.
It. No,
Oh, thank you. That is a relief.
So the family dynamic seemed so realistic to me. And I loved the mother who was constantly trying to smooth over any awkward situations. That's something I'm always doing between my husband and son. There was a lot of envy there between the two brothers. And I just wondered where that relationship between the brothers came from. Do you have a brother yourself? Or if not, how did you create that such realistic bond?
No, I don't have a brother. I've got two sisters. I think a lot of the purpose of the brother as a character within it is to provide Oliver with a different level of conflict to what he's finding through the strangers that he's meeting. And I think family-based conflict is very different to the other conflicts, such as romance or such as like sinister things. I mean, of course, sinister things can happen within the family, but I like the idea of just having a different dynamic there at play. And without giving away what happens between the two brothers later on, I think it helps up the stakes with him as a character as well. If we get the sense of there being another area of his life that could be at threat or that's impacted, or another member of his family could become entwined in this dangerous world he's kind of found himself in. So I think it's a mixture of those things, and it was quite fun to write their dynamic because I've never really written much kind of sibling based kind of relationships in my books.
It doesn't come up very often, actually, does it? Siblings?
No.
Now, our topic for today's show is thrillers. How dark is too dark? So you've written 5 thrillers before Notes on a Murder, and this one has a much darker feel to it. So can we start by asking if this was an intentional thing or something that evolved as the book and the characters came to life?
No, it wasn't intentional, in a sense that I didn't sit down to think, let's go really dark this time. That was just very much kind of baked into the plot when it arrived. Um, I I think for me, each book is very much kind of the story in its own right, and this is always something I think within publishing where if you're producing books under a certain name, there's reader expectation as to what would be within that. So I think we're often operating within kind of confined boundaries that occasionally we'd like to nudge or push in different areas. And I've kind of done this a couple of times with my books, and I like the idea that each one is hopefully different than the one before. And I think a darker edge does give it some difference, but that wasn't something that I decided to do. It just kind of happened with the story, and it just generally has to be a story that kind of captures my attention and makes me excited to write it. And if that happens to be dark, then kind of so be it. My previous book to come out, The Locked Attic, is nowhere near as dark as this book at all. I mean, not wanting to give too much away in that book, but there's no murders, there's no blood, there's definitely no mysterious underground things happening in islands. It's set in a suburban area of Kent. In many ways, it couldn't be more different. But hopefully, the suspense comes from the characters in that book and the interplay between them and the still sinister kind of things going on between those characters and the secrets they may hold. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's a big departure from my fiction, but I am conscious that it's probably my darkest since my debut, and which is A Version of the Truth. And actually, I should plug it. I do have a copy there. This was my
I've got one on
debut.
my shelf as well, actually.
Oh, have you?
We met a couple of years back, didn't we? At a
Yes,
lunch many
we did.
moons ago.
Yes, yeah, just
And I got
before
a
the
copy
pandemic.
then. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, this came out in 2019, and it is probably my darkest book, next to Notes on the Murder. And there is actually a connection with Notes on a Murder and this book, and eagle-eyed readers can see if they can say and spot it. But I mean, it is something that like you absolutely don't need to have knowledge of that book to see it within there. And all my books do that.
Easter egg kind of thing.
Yeah, and they're all in the same world. So people, if they read them in quick succession, they'll spot characters going in between the books.
Oh,
But
that's so clever.
yeah,
that's a bit of an in suspense exclusive there. Yeah, I'll be having to tell people to watch out for that. That's really interesting what you said actually about kind of having to write within boundaries, even within your genre. In terms of even if you have thrillers, so that your publisher expects there's certain expectations, I think, isn't there, by your readers, and it's how far you can kind of push those boundaries. It's very interesting. And I won't give away any plot spoilers, so don't worry. But some of the scenes on Argento's, is it Argento's? Argento's private island are pretty dark, particularly what happens with Jax and then Nita. So I wondered how far you'd actually go and take it in places, and you're very careful to keep, I think, a lot of the gory details off the page, and it all kind of happens within the reader's imagination. We imagine kind of what's happened because you're telling us, but not in any kind of graphic detail. So was darkness something that came up in your structural edit, or was there a conversation with your editor about kind of how far to push it? Did anyone kind of talk about that?
not really. My editor actually, she really liked the dark elements to the book. So there wasn't too much. There wasn't any dialing down actually. If there was anything, it was a slightly more kind of bringing forward. I mean, I was mindful in the structural edits about what a reader would expect, and I think this is a slight tangent, but recently I've been watching, every week I watch an old episode of the TV series Silent Witness. It's been going for 26, 27 years now, I think. And I've seen it all before, but I'm going through its back catalogue, and I've reached an episode that got 600 complaints to the BBC. And usually Silent Witness doesn't really get any complaints. And this episode had a particular scene of violence that viewers really responded to, and they wrote in their hundreds to complain to the BBC about it. And the BBC Trust ruled that the episode should never have been broadcast. It shouldn't have been shown. And they found that the BBC had essentially gone past their own kind of guidance policies on this. And which I found really fascinating. And because I love that kind of thing, I find that thing really interesting. I went and read the pages of BBC Trust reports and investigation into this. And within it, the executive producers and the producers of the show just try to justify what was within it and their thinking behind the reasons for the very dark aspect of that particular episode. But one of the things that the BBC Trust mentioned was that viewers for Silent Witness would be very used to it being a forensics drama, seeing bodies and crime scenes and that kind of thing. But the particular violence that occurred in that episode would have essentially confounded the viewer expectations, even if they were familiar with that series already. Okay. And that was the particular thing. And they said that was essentially borne out by the fact that 600 people chose to write in and complain about the episode when normally they wouldn't. And that really got me thinking about this idea of it's okay to operate in very dark corners of a particular genre, but even very dark things like Silent Witness that deals with the literal cutting open of corpses, even that does have a kind of a no-go kind of parameter around it of what would confound a viewer's expectation to that. And I think we operate in a very grey area in suspense fiction, because I think in police procedural, there is perhaps possibly more latitude when it comes to dark fiction, and particularly as police procedurals quite often look at serial killers. And I think if you're going in as a reader to read a book about someone who kills someone again and another person and another person and another person, you are kind of making a pact that you know what you're getting yourself into, really. And you're probably also quite aware that a lot of the detail will be the operations of that serial killer, and quite often they'll be very creative and very nasty, but that's kind of part of the genre and that's part of the arena you're entering. I think with psychological suspense, people are entering it for probably a bit of a different reason, probably as we said before about characters and relationships and that kind of thing. I think that's quite often more at the heart of it. The potentially creative mechanisms of a killer is probably not the main center focus of a psychological suspense novel, because that would take it into a different genre. So whilst I usually like to push against this idea of genre and it being too restrictive, it does exist. I think it is important for readers, retailers, publishers, everyone like that. It would be unhelpful to kind of deny that it's there. And I think just kind of make things easier, it's probably best to try and have a sense of where one's pitching kind of one's book. And I did try to do that. Having said that, I do like the idea of just writing how you think the book should be and then fine tuning a bit later, which is what I normally do.
Yeah.
But I don't like to kind of plan to a recipe and think, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. I like the idea to kind of, spread one's wings and then clip them afterwards.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really, really interesting, isn't it? Really interesting. So do you think that there is, so you're basically saying, like, if we said how dark is too dark, do you think that there is a line that you really can't cross if you're writing psychological suspense type thrillers? Or even if you're writing actually police procedural thrillers, there, I think there's probably, do you think there's lines that you shouldn't really cross?
Yeah, there's things that I think should people should take extremely cautiously or take extreme care when looking at, I think. And I've had kind of like quite strong reactions to some things. I think when they've taken me by surprise or it's gone darker than I originally expected. And I've never read the book Doctor Sleep, but I went to the cinema to see the film Doctor Sleep, and which is of course a sequel to The Shining. And without giving too much away, there's an extended sequence involving child torture within that, and I wasn't expecting that, and I was also surprised it was within a 15 certificate film, and I was quite troubled by that because I think particularly things like child torture
Mm.
or child murder, there is an area when you get into kind of things about responsibility and how you show them and that kind of thing. And I'm not necessarily criticizing the filmmakers of Doctor Sleep. I'm just more talking about my reaction to that particular scene. But I would tread very carefully if I was working within kind of scenes that did, or working with scenes that did that kind of thing. I wouldn't want to say that there are any issues that are out of bounds, because I don't like the idea of kind of drawing X's over things saying, no, writers shouldn't write about this. I think writers should be able to write about anything that comes to
Even
them.
cat murder and dog murder, you mean,
Yes,
Barnaby? Things
which
like
I wouldn't at
Well,
all. And I get that people have very kind of like strong reactions to anything involving animal death, which I do as well, Nikki. But I don't think there's anything people shouldn't write about. I think it's just the way it's presented. I think the question I would always ask myself if I was within doubt is, how is this advancing the plot? And what is this we're doing within the when, like, taken as a whole? Does it work within the book? Or is it just there as a nasty, shocking kind of scene, in which case it doesn't really serve the book as a whole, I don't think.
Yeah,
yeah, it just ends up with gratuitous violence, doesn't it?
yeah,
Rather than, as you say, advancing the plot.
yeah.
And I think, I mean, you've been incredibly clever, I think, in your book to make many of the characters who die particularly repellent, and so the reader doesn't feel so much sympathy with them. I think because we're kind of not on their side, so to speak, when they die. So was that deliberate? I think. Do you think you would have ended up with a much darker book if the people who had died were a lot more sympathetic to the reader?
I Yeah, there's a a kind of a trope in horror fiction, particularly in like the slasher genre, or even in films that are kind of regarded as torture porn, like Saw and Hostel, where you're kind of given permission sometimes to revel in the killing of a particular character. It's quite often a very unlikable character that you're almost waiting for that character to be killed. And there is, I think, it's almost become like an archetype or a real kind of stock part of that genre to almost give that viewer permission to say this death is the one that you're allowed to enjoy, which sounds rather awful saying that, but it happens time and time again. And I I didn't feel this book, I didn't feel it necessarily had time to look into that area or unpack that as much. And that wasn't necessarily the story I wanted to tell. But I am aware that it's easier for violence to perhaps seem more palatable when the characters are ones that you don't necessarily mind if it's, meted out to them. But that wasn't something that I put in as an ingredient to make it easier to swallow. It just was part of the story, really.
I think you make some really valid point there about reader expectations, and with the silent witness as well. And we're almost agreeing, the reader and the author are almost agreeing together, aren't they? This is what you're expected to get. And so when you don't get that, then it does ring alarm bells and isn't always enjoyable for the reader. And I think the other side of it is that what one person will find too dark, another person won't have any problems with. And I particularly have problems with anything too much about children, because I think it just hits home too much, especially if they're of a similar age to my own. Whereas other things I'm just like, yeah, no problem with this. So it is, I think, a personal choice, isn't it, the darkness?
Yeah, it really is. One of the to go back to what I was saying about Silent Witness, one of the key lines I remember from the BBC Trust's report was that the episode went beyond generally accepted standards. And there's this idea of generally accepted standards is such a vague concept. And if I'm writing and thinking like, does this go beyond generally accepted standards? Because I think we all have our own barometer about what, as you say, is generally expected, and that barometer within us, I think, or a sense of a litmus test when we're reading, that's influenced by our own experiences, by our own domestic setup, maybe by things that have happened in our past, by things we're particularly afraid of, phobias or whatever. And I think it's impossible to write with all those things in mind, really, and try to please everyone. So of course I think there'll always be things that might be particularly upsetting or particularly sensitive to some readers, and I have my own. You mentioned anything to do with dogs. I can't.
Yeah.
Can't do that.
And it's funny, I guess, isn't it? Because I mean, it's things. It is such a personal kind of thing. I mean, it's the things that scare you. That you remember scaring you as a child. Like I was petrified of the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the child catcher. Even as an adult, it slightly makes me kind of creepy. But I can watch kind of Saw, Hostel, anything like that, and it doesn't affect me at all. So I think it's just it is what affects you kind of psychologically, and that whether you find it particularly dark, I think, or not.
Yeah, I'd never want a reader to feel angry or feel as if they've been missold or kind of led into something that they didn't want to be kind of getting into, really. And that is a tricky territory because crime is a very broad church, and as we say, it can occupy lots of different things, but both within content and genre, I try hopefully to kind of, give something that will be satisfying, enjoyable, surprising still, but within. I mean, I always remember with the movie of Dan Brown's novel Inferno. I don't know if you've ever read or seen Inferno, but I won't give away the twist in the novel of Inferno, but it is a different twist to what happens in the film. And we're talking about playing with genre, and it does potentially tip into other areas of genre, and I don't want to give away what happens, but I really love the book of Inferno. I think it's a really clever book, but the film very much discards the controversial aspect in that book because the filmmakers essentially felt that audiences, it wouldn't work for them in such a way. For a satisfying big blockbuster mainstream movie, it would have been too much of an ask, whereas in the book, Dan Brown was able to kind of pull it off in his adept way that people did kind of enjoy. So if I do shift genre a little or kind of move a little bit here and there, I still want it operating in an area that I don't think will upset readers or make them feel like they've kind of, gone in for one thing and got another.
So with that in mind, when I'm looking at whether a film is appropriate for my kids, I go onto imdb.com and there's like a parental guidance, which just lists the things that a parent should be concerned about in every film. And so it's a little bit like trigger warnings, I guess, that we talk about sometimes on books, but it's a specific place. Maybe I could see it maybe on Goodreads, where you could just go on and sort of see some of the darkest things that happen. Do you think we'll ever get to a point where that sort of thing will happen for books, that we will have a special place on Amazon or on Goodreads where you can go and sort of say, right, so these are the things I would be concerned about?
Yeah, it's interesting. A few years ago, well, probably about 10 years ago, there was an attempt to introduce age ratings on books as there are to films. Because I do find it fascinating that if a 10-year-old child walked into HMV, it would be illegal for someone to sell them a Blu-ray of The Exorcist. But if they walked into a bookshop, a bookseller could sell them the book of The Exorcist with absolutely no problem at all.
Like having your own imagination is way scarier.
Yeah, and it is really interesting, and I get really obsessed in the areas of kind of film classification and kind of content guidelines and that kind of thing. And I live on the BBFC's website, which is the British Board of Film Classification, which issues all the ratings. And their website is an absolute treasure trove of this sort of thing. And I find it really interesting to see which bits they highlight for every film they classify. They do like a breakdown of everything that's in it, similar to the Parents Guide on IMDb. And the examiners give a real kind of breakdown of things they think could be particularly contentious. And there's always something that often surprises me, thinking I wouldn't have noticed that, but they're right. That is something that could be contentious. Even if it's like an activity that could be dangerous that a child's doing with an otherwise very child-friendly film, something like that wouldn't occur to me. Like Lilo and Stitch had to be cut in the UK because Lilo hides within a washing machine in the original cut of the film. And and in America and the rest of the world, they see Lilo hiding in the washing machine to hide from her sister. In the UK, they say this will have to be a 12 unless you cut and reanimate this scene. And Disney did go back and reanimated it, so she hides in a cupboard.
In fear that children in the UK would climb into washing machines.
Imitate.
Is that because in other countries you have a lift lid of a washing machine and therefore it's harder to get in? Or were they just not concerned that children in other countries would do that?
I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah, that as far as I'm aware, I don't know if any other countries did cut that scene, but I think generally internationally they didn't really mind. But in the UK, that had to be cut. But
you just reminded me that my mum once came and talked to me and my brothers and was like, some children have been playing in the sewers because they've been copying Ninja Turtles when it first came out. We were like, she was like, don't do that, will you? We were like, no, we'd never do that. So it is interesting that some obviously can create ideas in people's heads. So,
but yeah, with the content in books, I think it would be much harder to kind of, I don't know, provide any kind of framework of judging that, because I think it's even more ethereal or vague within fiction because a lot of it is our own imagination, whereas with visual content we're delivered the images wholesale, whereas with a book we're asked to create the images. And I think our imagination can limit us as well to, like, if we do find something particularly upsetting, that kind of kicks in, and we might not imagine it in as vivid detail as a filmmaker might give it to us. I think I like with the Harry Potter books, of course, they get steadily darker and darker as they go on, involving things like men hacking off their own arms in order to resurrect Lord Voldemort and things like that. And I think particularly me as a young reader, I found that quite disturbing because I'm quite a visual kind of person to imagine things, whereas I'm sure there are other kids that just would not care about Peter Pettigrew cutting his arm off. So I think with fiction it's so hard, but maybe a database of content would be useful to some, but I'd be hesitant if it came to any kind of grades or age ratings or anything like that.
Yes, because what's triggering for one person is not necessarily triggering for others as well. And trying to list everything that could possibly be triggering, I think, would be a very long list when it came to kind of crime and thrillers.
It would be as long as the book sometimes.
So what advice would you give then, Barnaby, to anybody thinking of writing a dark thriller?
I would say I'm kind of torn on this because part of me would really like to say, just write it exactly how you think it should be, and then kind of retrofit if you have to. And I think that would still be my advice, but I think there would be an asterisk and small print kind of with that. And I think that asterisk and small print would be that if you are, going to areas that you think could be contentious or could be very upsetting and or controversial, I would say go and look in bookshops or in cinema even and find key comparative things that you can use to justify the content of that. So I'd say to someone, if you wanted to write a dark thriller, write what you want, but be prepared to justify it. And I think key comparison books could be really useful if doing that. And I think always, probably when reading back through it, always have the question that we've spoken about: is this relevant to the plot? Does it move the plot forwards?
Yeah.
Does it work for itself within the book?
Yeah, very good idea and good advice. Thank you. So it's so fascinating then that within this genre we can see such variation. It's the same for how we all go about writing our books as well. So could you talk us through your writing routine and how you work, please, Barnaby?
Yes, I will. I do keep quite a strict routine on the days that I can, if that makes sense. But I'm not wedded to it where if a member of my family or my partner or my sister or someone said like, do you want to go out for lunch? I wouldn't say no, I can't because I'm writing today. I would very much adapt my schedule. So on a day where no such joyous event occurs, I would normally when I wake up, I go for a run straight away in the morning. And then when I get back, I would normally start writing probably immediately once I've chosen that morning's film. And this is something that people sometimes freak over. And when I say that I write when having the TV on, but I always do. I can't write in absolute silence. I have to have a movie or TV show I'm familiar with, and it has to be a drama or a movie. And I couldn't possibly have like a chat show. If for some reason I'd find something like a chat show or, daytime TV too distracting, it would have to be a story I know well. I know the beats of it, I know how it works. And I would have that on in the background. And so I'll choose that and I'll sit down to write. And I'll normally write until lunchtime. And I don't keep a word count. As long as the word count is going up, I'm not fussed. And normally, if it's kind of going up by 1,000 each day, I'm happy. But normally, if I haven't got a pressing deadline, I wouldn't look at it too much. As long as I feel like I have written, then I'm fine. So yeah, I normally write until lunchtime, and then I normally go swimming or to the gym. And then when I come back, normally I reserve the afternoon for reading. If I have something very pressing to do, like structural edits have come in or whatever, I might continue to write or work on those, or I might continue to work on another project. And this is another thing that some authors kind of don't like, but I love to work on different projects at once. So I usually have 2 or 3 books on the go that I'm writing. So I quite like the idea of like spending time in one and then going to another, almost like you're going to different rooms in a house, really.
I'm going to make a face. No, don't contact Switch.
We go, no, I can't do that. One at a time.
Like, that does answer one of my questions, because I obviously see on Twitter that you watch so many films, and I'm like, when does he write his books? He's watched 7 films this week. I haven't watched any, just turn the telly on. But obviously, you're watching these films while you're writing.
Yeah,
It makes much
as long
yes.
as long as I've seen them before, anything new and exciting, like I wouldn't be able to write. I would end up just watching. Yeah, as long as I'm seeing them before, I'm familiar with them. They're on
That's
the back.
so
Does it make a
interesting.
difference, like if it's like a romantic comedy and you're writing a scary scene? Like, does the theme of the story have to connect in any way?
No, not normally. No, I don't necessarily match. If I do match, I sometimes, if I've kind of finished the movie and I've got a little pocket of time that I'm going to carry on writing, but there isn't enough time to watch another one, I might put on a movie soundtrack, go on YouTube and put movie soundtracks on. And the author Kelly Taylor, who I think you may know as well, she does the same thing, and we kind of trade movie soundtrack suggestions. But that's when I would match the vibe to the thing I'm writing. For some reason, music, I think I'd feel the disjointed nature of it if it was really kind of happy or nice and light or something, I wouldn't work well to it. Whereas if it was a soundtrack of a horror film or a dark thriller, it would then chime well with what I'm writing, and that would work for me. But yeah, for some reason, I'm happy to put on, like, I might go from having, I don't know, something extremely dark or horrible like The Shining or The Exorcist, and then have Pretty Women or Runaway Bride, and it wouldn't bother me.
Hand in hand.
Yeah.
Can you listen to music with lyrics, or does it have to be without lyrics?
I wouldn't listen to music with lyrics. I don't listen to too much music full stop. It would be to fill a kind of a pocket of time, and if I did, when I do that, it has to be orchestral. It can't really be
I like
lyrics.
orchestral.
Yeah. And I think also, if I can put on a movie soundtrack, I don't notice the gaps in the tracks as easily.
Oh,
Whereas
yeah.
with a song, it's very much a complete thing
Yeah, it
within
is.
itself.
Yeah.
So normally it has to be a movie soundtrack, or a piece of orchestral music by someone like Philip Glass or something, where like his symphonies could go on for 15, 20 minutes.
Yes.
Something where I won't have to think, oh, that song's done, now I need to choose another one, which could kind of take me out of it.
That's it. I feel like I should know this, but Nikki, do you listen to anything while you're writing?
No, I mean, occasionally I will listen to kind of movie soundtracks, or I like Philip Glass as well. I love his stuff, but it absolutely can't listen to lyrics, and absolutely can't have the TV or the film on. No, it normally, like 95% of the time, it would be silent. I just want silence. Yeah.
I have to listen to concentration music when I'm at home quite a lot of the time, which is like this weird, like constant drumming and beachy noises. But when I'm out in a cafe and it's really busy, I don't need anything, and I don't even mind if there's someone sat at the table next to me chatting away about something. I almost find it easier to concentrate when there's people around me talking.
That's
which
true.
is so weird, as long as they're not my family.
It's the ambience, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't often write in cafes, but I often read in cafes, and it's the ambient noise that.
That's true.
Yeah, funny.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, actually. And to finish off, we'd love to ask you what you're reading right now or have recently finished, and what would you like to recommend to our listeners?
Well, you've caught me in a very good week for this, because every autumn I take a week off writing and do what I call a reading retreat.
I just love this.
I'm very jealous of your reading retreat.
And normally I sometimes go away to do it, sometimes stay at home. This year I did it partly in London and have now come back to Essex, where I live. But the retreat is in a sense that it's a retreat kind of from work, from everything else, from the pressures of kind of everyday life. And it's about giving oneself permission. I think that's the biggest part for me, is just saying you have permission to just completely immerse yourself in books. So I think I'm on day 4 of my reading retreat, and I've just done book 5, I think, and all of them I've read so far have been completely brilliant, and some of them I've been even saving for my reading retreat. I feel very guilty if I get sent a proof and then I haven't read it in time, but sometimes I like the idea of saving a book that I'm particularly looking forward to. So I've just finished Lisa Jewell's None of This Is True, which is just incredible. I was completely mesmerized to it. And I've just finished Adele Parks' latest thriller as well.
Yes, I want to read that one.
Yeah, which is so clever because it's a sequel to one of her previous books. But
really?
but you can read it as a standalone.
What's the sequel to?
You're testing me now.
So it's not her, because I really liked her latest one, the one before the one that's just coming out. I can't remember.
I'm gonna look it up.
Sorry.
It's gonna be. I think it is a sequel to, and the new one's called Just Between Us, and it is a sequel to Both of You, I believe.
Okay.
So, but you can still read it as a standalone. And I worried that I wouldn't remember Both of You enough to get it, but it all came flooding back.
Yeah, it does. It's weird that.
It's just such a clever kind of tightrope trick, I think, to pull, to be able to write a direct sequel to a book but still make it work entirely in its own right. But she does it, and it's just brilliant. I loved it. So I've just read, those are the 2 most recent ones I've just read, and I read another one called In Ascension, which is nominated for the Booker Prize this year, which is more science fiction. And I don't often read science fiction, but the cover kind of caught my eye in Waterstones, so I had to buy it. And yeah, really enjoyed that as well. So yeah, there are three that I've really enjoyed recently.
Nice ones.
Fantastic. What about you, Lauren? What have you read recently?
I have read Lisa Hall's The Mysterious Double Death of Honey Black.
Oh, it's so good.
Which I really loved. And I wasn't sure I was going to, because I'm never sure how I'm going to find historical novels sometimes. And it was time slips. I wasn't sure how I was going to find the back and forth. But it was just so amazingly done and so seamless. And I could hate her if I didn't love her so much, because she just writes such great thrillers. And now she's just created this whole other world in this Hollywood Hotel series, which is just so amazing. So yeah, she is a wonderful person and a super talented writer. So yeah, I'm love her and hate her at the same time. It's amazing. And the other book I have just finished reading is Becca Day's The Secrets We Keep, which is her third novel and is again a fantastic book. I think what I always like about Becca's books is that it's such a great hook. So yeah, really good one and really enjoyed that too. What about you, Nikki?
Well, I have read The Quiet Tenant by Clemence Michallon. I've got it's out now, but I was reading a proof, and yeah, I mean, we're talking about dark thrillers. This is definitely a dark thriller. It's a kind of dark literary thriller, and about a man who has abducted somebody, and I won't tell you any more than that. But I thought it was brilliant, really well written, and very cleverly done. So really enjoyed that. And I've also read Monsters by Claire Dederer, which looks a bit like that. Which
wow,
isn't.
cover.
Yeah, it's amazing cover, isn't it? But it's a non-fiction book, and it's about what do we do with the art of monstrous men. So it's really interesting discussion about men like Roman Polanski and Picasso, and the kind of terrible things that they have done in real life, and how you kind of equate that to the amazing pieces of art or books or whatever, films that they produce. So yeah, quite fascinating, really fascinating read, really interesting it. So yes.
Some very different books there this week, all of us.
I know. Yeah.
We've all got our game up to our game a bit this summer. So sadly, that is all we've got time for today. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please do rate and review on any of our social media channels so others can find us. Thank you. And thanks so much, Barnaby, for sharing your insights into dark thrillers. It's been so fascinating to hear how you think about dark thrillers and the readers and the contracts. That's really interesting. Thank you. Notes on a Murder is out on the 23rd of November and available for pre-order. So do grab your copy now.
Yes, do indeed. It's a fantastic read. And next week, it's the first of our mini-sodes on agents, where we're going to be talking to Alice Hoskins, who's an agent's assistant. And we're going to cover all different topics that are going to hopefully interest anyone who is on submission, and also those who've already got an agent. So if you've got anything in particular you'd like to ask, then do get in touch with us through any of our social media channels, and we will try our best to incorporate your questions and ask Alice those. So, but for now, it is goodbye from Barnaby Walter.
Bye.
Goodbye from Lauren North. And goodbye from me.